This story happened back in the 90s to my parents during their senior year of high school. Since their group of friends already had cars, the favorite thing they loved to do was night hiking around the state's local mental hospital, mainly its old dairy farm. This was located right on the side of a mountain, surrounded by agricultural fields and an open grassland. Since the dairy farm was not that close to the mental hospital, and the nearest city life was located about 5 miles away, that area at night was extra dark and quiet. Before the farm was closed down, the patients from the mental hospital would often go there for work. During this time, some of the patients lost their lives in this location due to accidents. By the 90s, it was completely abandoned, left there like a ghost town, especially due to the rumors of it being haunted. It made the perfect place for a fearful experience. This particular night around 2 in the morning, my dad, my mom, 4 of their female friends, and 1 of their male friends planned to go down to the old farm. They took 2 cars, and when they got to the usual parking spot on the side of the mountain, they saw there was already a group of 20 or so people standing there. When my parents and their friends got out of their cars, they noticed that this group of men all had shaved heads, were Caucasian, and in their mid-20s. As my parents walked past them, both groups did their best to ignore each other and avoided making eye contact. My mom, however, turned her head to see one of the men. As she did this, the man pulled back his jacket and showed off a pistol tucked in his pants. Then he pulled back his lower lips, which revealed he had a KKK tattooed on his bottom lip. When they were out of hearing range, my mom whispered to my dad, "That guy had a gun, and he has KKK tattooed on him." My dad brushed it off, thinking my mom was over-exaggerating. He said it was too dark to even notice such things. With that, my parents and their friends walked through the grassland to get to the farm. The hike to get there was about a half a mile from where they'd parked. However, as soon as they got to the farm, they heard gunshots ringing out from the direction of the cars. Fearing that something had happened, they booked it back to the parking lot. When they got back, the group of men were already gone. As they inspected their cars, though, they saw all of their tires had been slashed, and their windows had been broken and smashed in, too. My dad had his stereo stolen, as well as a particular colored blanket he used as a seat cover. Now they just stood there by their cars, wondering what to do next. It's not like they could just call somebody for help. No one had a cell phone at that time. Since they were so deep in a secluded area too, it's not like they could flag someone down for a quick pickup. The nearest gas station with a payphone was 5 miles away. Both my dad and his male friend didn't want to leave the cars alone. They feared the men would come back. Eventually, it was decided amongst everyone that sending both the men to run to the payphone was the best option, leaving the women by themselves with the cars. This was because they feared the shaved men might be waiting down the road, expecting them to walk to the payphone. My dad and his friend did their best to run to the gas station. As they left, my mom and her friends all gathered up heavy rocks to use as some sort of protective weapon and hid away in the bushes behind the trees. 2 hours passed by when my mom noticed headlights coming down the road. 2 tow trucks rolled into the parking spot. An immense fear began to spread throughout the group until they saw that my dad and his brothers came out of the tow trucks. They hooked up the cars and were out of there in a matter of minutes. My dad told my mom as they were running down that dark and empty road, they'd kept their eyes open, just in case the men were hiding with their cars' lights off. Luckily, they got to the gas station without much problem. The next part may be a bit hard to believe, but it's 100% true. 2 weeks had passed by since, and my dad managed to get his car fully repaired and drivable again. My mom and dad were driving to the local store when they parked and got out of the car. As they were walking, a man began to come towards them. As he got closer, my mom realized it was the same shaved-headed man who had flashed the gun at her. My mom immediately told this to my dad, but just like the first time, my dad denied this was true. 2 weeks later, at the very same store, my mom and dad were sitting in their car when my mom saw a car pull up next to them. As the man got out and stood there, She noticed it was the same man once again. My mom immediately told this to my dad. Again, he denied it. My mom looked once more into his car, though, and saw the very recognizable blanket my dad had used as a seat cover. That's when my dumbass dad finally connected the dots and got out of the car to confront the man. The man, realizing they'd recognized him, jumped back into his car and drove away. They didn't have time to get the plate numbers. The next week, when my dad was filling gas into his car, a car pulled up right behind him. Lo and behold, the same man again. My dad went to get into the guy's face, ready to confront him. One of the man's friends got out of the car and pulled out a gun on him. The man with the gun told everyone to get inside, and that group drove away. It's been almost 30 years since then, and they've never seen those men since. My family and I went on a trip to the Hocking Hills area of southern Ohio just a few weeks ago. There was a place I always wanted to visit, the abandoned ghost town Moonville Rail Tunnel. I had never been to this area, so I didn't know what to expect. I did know it was pretty deep in the woods though. We took a trip from our rented cabin, using Google GPS to get to the location. We started driving, and it was, for lack of a better word, a real impoverished area. It had a very Hills Have Eyes-esque ambiance. We literally only saw like 2 cars on the way there, and on the back roads as well. We got to a point where we needed to enter the forest, and were close by to the tunnel. There was a sign that said we were entering Bubblewood. For a little more additional information, I drive a Mercedes that I'm lucky to have, and my husband was in the car. He's a black man with dreadlocks, and I had my 10-year-old nonverbal autistic son with me as well, and my 6-year-old daughter too. We drove down this real creepy stone road into the forest. There was nothing back there. No cars, no houses, not a single person. We did see signs we were close though, and pulled into the parking lot. There was a footbridge that people had built there. We walked over the footbridge and made our way toward the tunnel, which was a lot larger than I'd expected. All of a sudden, we heard this sound coming from the other side of the tunnel, into the woods, away from the parking lot. A truck came driving towards us while we were on foot. The truck stopped in the middle of the tunnel. The person got out of their truck with a chainsaw. I could see it was a white guy in his 60s. He started to walk after my family, following us everywhere we went through the tunnel. I tried to call out to him and pull some info about if he worked for the Department of Natural Resources or something, but he wouldn't say a single word. As we turned around to leave, he started to rev up his chainsaw behind us. The sound echoed throughout the tunnel. At this point, we had no cell phone service, and literally no one knew my family was out there except for us. I was already worried my car might be sending the wrong idea to people, like we were some naive folks with money or something. We didn't have much. We rushed back to the car to get the kids in their booster seats. This motherfucker jumped back into his car and drove over the footbridge in his truck towards us, following us to the parking lot. Honestly, I don't even know how his truck fit onto that bridge. He stopped again and got out of his truck. About this point, I noticed there were some dusty handprints on my car. I asked my husband if they were his. We compared his hand and my son's, and they were not a match. I don't know who would have been touching the car, because we were watching the chainsaw man the entire time we were there. Needless to say, we got out of there as fast as possible. Just a few minutes later, though, I looked back into my rear view mirror, only to see a bunch of dust kicking up behind us. There he is. He had driven pretty fast on the stone road to catch up to us. There was nowhere to go in these woods. The road was basically one lane, and we still had no GPS. Every time I thought we would lose him, he would turn up behind us once again. I was just waiting for my tires to pop on a trap or something, or for this guy to speed up and ram me off the road into a ravine. Finally, we emerged from the woods. I turned around, only to see he was still following us. We were following printed directions to get back, and I ended up making a wrong turn in all the excitement. Surprisingly, the guy in the truck did not follow us. I turned around to go back past the stone road that went into the forest and take a different way. There was one lone house near this road, and to my surprise, I saw his truck parked right there. He had to have seen us drive into the road in the woods and taken some way back to the tunnel. I don't know if he was trying to protect the site from some graffiti or what, but that was really scary. It was like every scary movie trope rolled into one single event. Me, my ex-boyfriend, and another friend had been visiting some friends up north. We live in Germany, and I and one of the friends we were visiting are Wiccans. A holiday was coming up soon, so we asked our friends to join us for a little ritual. For this, we needed some corn leaves. We went out on a quest to gather some. It was pitch black and probably about 11 p.m. or so. We were already well out of the city and in the middle of nowhere on a path between fields. There were 4 people there, including me. I was holding the only flashlight. Everyone had a beer and music going, and the mood was fairly good. Nobody was scared at all. All of a sudden, though, my friend, who was walking slightly in front of me, stopped and said, "I think something's walking there." I got this instant chill coming over me. As we all stopped, I began to hear something rustling in the high grass besides the path. A scream rang out in the night, the kind of scream you'd make while being stabbed to death. But it wasn't coming from any of us. I don't know why I just froze there. I just got scared from 0 to 100 in a single millisecond. My friend said, "It's okay. I'm sure it's just a deer." The others tried to reaffirm as well. Yeah, it's just a deer." I was calming down pretty fast because I was thinking to myself, okay, yeah, that makes sense, I guess. The rustling started up again, though. I shined my light out into the grass, but I didn't see anything. Nothing. I thought I should have been able to see a deer because I was holding the flashlight and pointing it right in there. I should have seen something. The grass on both sides was obviously moving and rustling, but I couldn't see anything there. I began to scream because I was so scared. My friend pointed out that she'd seen something standing at the side of the road, then suddenly crawling across. I still had not seen anything myself. She began to scream too. The other 2 were too scared to say anything at all. I was already hysterical and crying and screaming when we heard the rustling now closer than ever and what sounded like giggling, like an evil, malicious giggling. I'm truly not trying to be dramatic here. We all confirmed afterwards that that's exactly what we'd heard. I was starting to have a little bit of a panic attack. I was crying and the others were scared as well. We just started to book it back to town. I swear, in the single moment I looked behind me, it looked like there was someone crouching in the grass smiling. I'd never run that fast in my entire life. It certainly wasn't a deer, I'll tell you that. Why they'd giggled like that and stalked us in the grass, I have no idea. My friend and I both just don't know what we should think about this event. I would say it was pretty damn spooky though. Sorry, this turned into a bit more of a written piece than I expected it to become, but this is one of those stories that my husband and I trot out occasionally to this day. It wasn't exactly in the woods. I guess it kind of was. As best we could tell, it was on uninhabited land that was surrounded by forests on all sides, but was not part of the woods itself. Woods adjacent, I guess I'd say. Most of my family, for the longest time, was centrally located in Florida, going back for many generations. That's changed as people have gotten older and passed on, of course, and needed to move out to different places due to the job market in the state stagnating. Back during this time, though, I was sort of the black sheep of the family for being one of the only few to get out of there. I still tried to make trips down there to see them when I could, though, when time and money allowed for it. I was still in my early 20s and trying to keep my head above water financially. For this particular trip, I decided to introduce my then boyfriend and now husband to all of my family. On top of for once having company on an extended road trip, it was also time for us to test out our shiny, newfangled GPS to get us where we were going. It had been long enough since my last journey that I didn't really trust my memory to lead me through Florida's roads anymore. Not until I was in my home city proper, at least. Well, it turned out to be an entertainingly terrible trip. We were hit by a thick fog and rain at the state border, to the point where the visibility was literally zero. For one of the few times I'd ever seen in that state, we also began to get pelted by hail in big enough pieces that it broke my car's wipers. After debating whether we wanted a chance trying to find a place to pick up a replacement, and essentially having to navigate this terrible weather with an increasingly shaky GPS device in the middle of the night, we decided to keep on trucking. I made do with what visibility I could. I figured being able to read the road signs wouldn't matter so much, since we had our computerized road map giving us instructions. That's what I thought, at least. At some point, that calm, mechanical voice instructed us to make an unexpected turn off the main road. After a little bit of back and forth with my SO, we jokingly decided to go with the flow and take it. What was the worst that could happen? We figured that if it led us the wrong way, we could easily make a U-turn if it was off the mark. For all we knew, it was operating with information about some kind of road obstruction or accident we couldn't see yet. The weather was still absolute crap after all. We drove for a good amount of distance. Within the first couple of miles, every other bit of traffic dropped off. A few minutes and another turn later, the road made an abrupt transition from concrete to gravel. I shrugged my shoulders. At least it would be a somewhat entertaining dogleg in our trip, even if I still couldn't see any of the landscape in this soupy weather. I told my SO to keep his eyes peeled for a good place to turn around, since our 2-lane road had just turned into an unpaved 1-lane path with a ditch running along each side. It was surrounded by increasingly heavy tree line as well. One point of silvery lining, I suppose, is that the horrible spew falling from the sky at this point finally paused a bit, giving us a bit of relief. I was not so afraid of getting our car stuck in the mud while making a turnaround now. This also meant we now had an unobstructed view of the woods as they broke on one side of us. This revealed what looked to be an old farmhouse sticking out like a sore thumb. We went absolutely silent when we saw this thing. The GPS stopped working at this point. It looked very abandoned, which in itself was not unexpected. Florida backcountry, as I was familiar with, tended to be flat as a pancake, with fields and sporadic wooded sections. Every once in a while, you'd get some abandoned building, usually from someone who owned more land than they could maintain, or couldn't afford to keep up anymore. This fit the bill with its empty broken windows and peeling whitewash boards. It had a surprisingly well-maintained clear space around it though, a decently sized yard, and festooned around that clear space, sometimes sitting up on pieces of raggedy furniture or set up in little dioramas on the saggy porch of the building, were dolls. Thousands of varyingly shaped dolls, sometimes marionettes or Cabbage Patch style, human-sized mannequins set on rocking chairs so it stared at you not 5 feet from the road. This was especially disorienting because all of the fog hadn't fully cleared yet, so we could only see this head and shoulders emerging from the mush before you got closer and saw it wasn't actually a person. I'm not ashamed to say I veered over as sharply as I could on that narrow path because it fooled me for a handful of seconds. We were both rubbernecking like crazy as we passed this by. The more we observed, the more we could see all the attention to detail someone went through to set everything up. The dolls were all sitting at tiny doll-sized tables, having tea with one another. Some of them had very elaborate clothes. Some even had hair, but they were all slumped on the ground like they'd been forgotten. Others were very purposefully placed. I can't imagine how much effort that would have taken. We passed by without a single word said, and waited until it finally veered out of our sight. Then I turned us around regardless of how narrow this path still was. We had come to the consensus that our side trip down this unknown road was now done. When we went by that dollhouse again, I was going about as quickly as I judged our car could go. I'm sure everyone else got another good eyeful the second time around. Nowadays, we still occasionally reference that dollhouse when talking about trips to Florida. It's definitely one of those things you find entertaining from several states away, but not with a dead-eyed mannequin staring directly at your car as you drive past in the fog. This happened to me a few years ago. I worked second shift at the time, getting off at midnight. I would sometimes hit up Denny's after work for a late-night dinner. One night, I'm sitting there in a booth, just reading my book and eating my dinner, when I look up and notice a guy at another table, sitting all by himself in the corner, just staring at me. I didn't really think too much of it at first. Maybe he just liked late-night people watching or something. We made eye contact for a moment, and he immediately looked away. A while later, I sense something and look up, only to see that same guy staring at me again. Exact same thing happened too. Eye contact, then he looked away. At this point, my instincts started to twinge a bit. He hadn't come over to me or anything though, so I let it go. I just tried to finish up my eating as quickly as possible and pay at the register. The man immediately got up to pay right behind me. Now I was starting to get a little creeped out. After I paid, I moved over to the side, pretending to be searching for something in my purse. He lingered around for a moment, waiting to see if I'd stay there longer, then left the building. I waited 10 minutes to leave, cursing at myself that I'd parked over at the side of the building instead of the windowed front. If this happened today, I'd probably simply ask an employee to walk me out, but I was young and didn't want to inconvenience anyone. I walked out to my car on high alert and got in. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, his car pulled in right next to mine, and he started to get out. I was really freaked out at this point. I hit my door locks and backed out of my parking space. There were 2 ways to exit the lot. A driveway a few feet away, going directly onto the service road, which would take me right past his car. Or I could go around the building and cross over into the next door Waffle House's parking lot and exit their driveway. I chose to go around the building. When it was clear I was going to leave quickly, the man jumped back into his car and began to follow me. I was panicking now. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go home, as I didn't want this guy to know where I lived. Luckily, that Waffle House next door had a front wall full of windows and a parking space open right in the front. I pulled into the spot as swiftly as I could, jumped out of my car, and ran into the building. I looked back outside, only to see his car stop behind mine in the middle of the lane. There was this enraged look on his face. At this point, I was shaking and nearly hyperventilating. The waitresses were seriously nice. They asked me what was wrong, and I stuttered out I was being followed. One of the waitresses came around the counter and stood next to me. She stared down that car creep until he drove off. She sat me down in a booth and gave me a cup of coffee for free, telling me to wait a while before heading out home. I left about 20 minutes later. I watched every car on the road to make sure that guy was not following me. I never went back to that area after work again, though I did write a thank you note to the waitresses and dropped it off during the day. It scared the shit out of me. To this day, the thing that makes me angry about this was, after telling some friends what happened, a couple of them tried to convince me the man must have thought I was cute and just wanted to talk to me. They didn't see that guy's face when I got to safety. I could tell he wanted to hurt me. Thankfully, he never got the chance.